Some stories begin with a shout, or a gunshot, or the thunder of hooves. This one began with the soft, resigned sigh of a man opening a letter he'd been dreading for 3 months. It was a sound so small, so human, that it cut through the howl of the New Mexico wind like a bell. I was sitting on my porch, mending a bridle when I saw him read it. I saw his shoulders slump, not in defeat, but in a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the long, dry summer. I'd known John Miller for 6 years. I'd seen him face down a grizzly, stare down a claim jumper, and nurse a calf back from the brink of death with nothing but a look of quiet focus. I'd never seen him look so utterly lost. The letter fluttered from his fingers, and for a long moment he just stared out at the distant, shimmering peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. A delicate frontier bride, that's what the advert had promised him. A refined, gentle soul to bring music and grace back into his lonely homestead. He'd traded letters with her for a year, a dream built on ink and hope. He ordered a rose and gotten a cactus, and that cactus, my friends, was about to teach him what it really meant to live. This is the story of a man who was looking for a woman to complete his world, and instead found the one who would shatter it, just so he could build it back stronger. The first time I saw her was from the window of my own cabin, a quarter-mile away. She was standing in the yard of Miller's place, looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped in a pig trough. Her dress, which might have been a deep, respectable blue a week ago, was now the dusty gray of the trail. It was a fine dress, the kind you'd see in a fancy catalog, with lace at the collar and cuffs, but now it was wrinkled, stained, and hanging on her as if she'd been swimming in it. Her hair, a pale, mousy blonde, had escaped its pins and was plastered to her temples with sweat. She was staring at the cabin, this ramshackle structure of logs and chinking that John called home, with an expression of such undisguised horror that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I'd known the moment she arrived, even before the letter. I'd been out checking fence lines on the eastern range when I saw the stagecoach, a tiny black speck on the far horizon, kicking up a plume of dust. I watched it rumble past the crossroads and head for Miller's place. This wasn't a regular stop. This was a delivery, a special delivery from the east. I had to hand it to John. He tried real hard. I watched him greet her. He was a big man, John, all sun-browned skin and quiet strength, a man more comfortable with a horse than with a parlor conversation. He'd done his best to clean up. He was wearing his one good shirt, the one he saved for town trips and weddings, and his hair was slicked back with what I figured was a mixture of water and bacon grease. He held his hat in his hands like a man at a funeral, and he walked towards her with the careful, hesitant steps of a man approaching a spooked mare. He offered his hand, his voice a low rumble I couldn't make out from my distance. This Miss Abigail Pemberton from Boston, didn't take it. She just kept staring at the cabin. She was a tiny thing, fine-boned and delicate, with hands that had probably never held anything heavier than a teacup. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled old-timer who liked his whiskey more than his horse, tipped his hat to her with a smirk and clucked his team forward, leaving her stranded on that dusty patch of ground with a single, battered trunk and the weight of her dreams. For the next 2 weeks I watched the tragedy unfold. I felt like a man with a front row seat to a train wreck, horrified, unable to look away. John, in his earnest, clumsy way, tried to build her a world. He'd bring her wildflowers he'd picked from the high meadows, their petals already wilting in the heat. He'd try to fix a sagging porch step, his hammer blows echoing in the still air. He'd cook for her simple, hearty food, but I saw her leave the plates on the porch untouched, the food congealing in the sun. She in turn tried. I saw her attempt to hang laundry on a line, her delicate hands struggling with the rough, homespun fabric. She'd stand in the doorway, squinting at the vast, empty horizon, a look of profound loneliness on her face. She'd read a book on the porch, her voice a faint, threadbare murmur as she tried to fill the silence with words from another world. I once saw her pick up a chicken, and it was clear she had no idea what to do with it. She held it at arm's length, her face a mask of disgust and fear. One evening, a week after she'd arrived, I rode over with a bottle of whiskey. It was my excuse. I told myself it was neighborly to welcome the new bride, but I was just plain curious. The air inside his cabin was thick and heavy. The last of the evening light was bleeding through the single, grimy window, illuminating a room that was trying too hard. A table in the center held a single, sad little vase with a few of John's wilted flowers in it. She was sitting by the fire, not in it, but as close as she could get without being singed, shivering in a fine wool shawl that was wholly inadequate for the high desert chill. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Mr. Dawson," John said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. He gave me a strained, welcoming smile. This is Miss Pemberton, my wife soon." He corrected himself, a flush creeping up his neck. I extended my hand to her. "Ma'am, welcome to the Pecos Valley." Her handshake was a limp, damp affair. She barely met my eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's lovely." Her voice belied everything. It was the voice of a woman who was screaming on the inside. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the scratch of a mouse in the wall. "Just brought a little something to celebrate your arrival," I said, pulling the bottle from my coat pocket. John's eyes lit up with genuine relief. "That's mighty neighborly, Bill, mighty neighborly." I poured 3 generous glasses. I handed one to John, one to her, and kept one for myself. John threw his back in one gulp. I took a sip. She just stared at hers as if it were poison. The silence was back, heavier than before. "So, Miss Pemberton," I began, trying to make conversation. "Long journey out from Boston, I reckon." "Yes," she didn't look up from her glass. "Very long." John, trying to help, blurted out, "She misses the trees, the green. She says our hills are too brown." I nodded slowly. "They have a beauty of their own, ma'am. You just have to get used to them. The colors at sunset are like nothing else." She finally lifted her head, and I saw a flicker of something other than despair in her eyes. It was a desperate, wild hope. "Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice gaining a little strength, "is there a music hall or a library? A place where people gather?" John shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "There's the schoolhouse, Abigail. We have a dance there every harvest moon. Reverend Peters gives a sermon on Sundays when he's passing through." She looked at him, and the wild hope died. The light in her eyes went out, replaced by a cold, dead, desolate look. It was the look of a woman who had just realized she was already buried. I stayed for an hour trying to fill the air with talk of cattle, the rain, and the latest news from town. But there was no fixing this. Their conversation was stilted, formal, full of "yes, ma'am," and "no, sir," and agonizing pauses that stretched into eternity. He spoke of soil and seasons. She spoke of books and society. They were like 2 people trying to converse in different languages. When I left, I saw her on the porch. She was standing in the darkness, staring up at the blanket of stars that was so clear and vast and unforgiving. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. I saw John come to the door behind her. He reached out a hand as if to touch her shoulder to offer some comfort. But he stopped, his hand hovering in the air inches away from her. He just stood there, watching her, his face a portrait of a pain so deep and profound it seemed to have no source. Then he turned away. He chose to be alone with his failure rather than burden her with his presence. I saw my friend's heart break, and I knew the worst was yet to come. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic fight with raised voices and slammed doors. It was quieter than that. It was the silence that grew between them, louder than any shout, festering in the small, claustrophobic space of a one-room cabin. A month after her arrival, I rode past their place on my way to the general store. The morning was bright, crisp, and promised a blistering afternoon. As I approached, I didn't see John. He was probably out with the horses, a task he was always happy to have an excuse for. But I did see her. She was outside the cabin, not on the porch, but on her knees in the hard, packed earth of the yard. I reined in my horse. The scene was so unexpected, so jarring. She was still wearing her city clothes, but they were now a permanent shade of dust. Her hair was scraped back, its pale color now streaked with grime, and in her hands she was clutching a small, pitiful-looking shovel. She was digging a hole. I dismounted and walked towards her, my boots crunching on the dry ground. She didn't look up. She was muttering to herself, a frantic, feverish whisper. "Not enough sun, the soil is too alkaline. She said it would take, he said it would be fine." "Miss Pemberton," I said, my voice soft. She started looking up at me with wide, unseeing eyes. For a moment she didn't seem to recognize me. Then a flicker of awareness returned. "Oh, Mr. Dawson." She wiped a dirty hand across her forehead, leaving a streak of mud. "He said they'd grow. My mother sent them. She said they were hardy. They were supposed to bring color to the place." She gestured with the shovel. There, in a neat, pathetic row, were a half-dozen small, dried-up plants. They were some kind of flower, I guessed, though they looked more like brown twigs shoved into the ground. Lilacs, maybe, or roses, something delicate and fragrant that would never, ever survive in this high, dry land. I don't think they're going to make it, ma'am," I said gently. Her face crumpled. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was a complete, utter despair that was painful to witness. "I know," she whispered. "Nothing here makes it, not the flowers, not the garden I tried to plant, not my marriage." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I can't even make a home, Mr. Dawson. I can't even do that right." In that moment, I didn't see the disappointed frontier bride. I just saw a human being, a lost, frightened girl who had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that this land breaks strong men, let alone gentle women from the city. But I was a rancher, not a preacher. I didn't have the words. The ranch was quiet. Their home, which should have been a sanctuary, had become a place of unhappiness. John had stopped trying to cook. He'd just take a hunk of bread and cheese out to the barn to eat with his horses. She, in turn, had stopped trying to maintain the house. It was cluttered, dusty, and looked abandoned. I saw all the signs of a slow, creeping defeat. A week later, I got word from the stage driver that John had been seen in town at the Mercantile. He'd left her alone. That was the first sign something was truly wrong. He never left her alone. I had a bad feeling in my gut, the kind I get before a bad storm. I rode over to their cabin that afternoon. The yard was a mess. Her pathetic flower bed was now a patch of barren, churned earth where she tried to dig them up, failed, and just left them. The bucket on the porch had run dry. I knocked. No answer. I pushed the door open. The cabin was empty. The interior was a disaster. Her dresses were strewn about as if she'd been looking for something and given up. Her trunk was open and its contents were in a confused pile. The table was set for 2 plates, cups, cutlery, but it was the saddest sight I'd ever seen. A gray, crusted loaf of bread sat on one plate, and a fly buzzed lazily over a bowl of something that had once been a stew. They hadn't even tried to have a meal together. They just let it sit and rot, a symbol of their decaying union. But there was something else, a piece of paper on the table. I walked over and picked it up. It was a letter, written in a delicate, looping script. It was her handwriting. I felt a stab of guilt for reading it, but I was more scared for my friend. "John," it began, "I have gone to Santa Fe. There is a minister there and a woman who has offered me a position as a tutor in her home. It's not much, but it is a way to earn my keep until I can afford passage back east. I cannot stay here. Every day I look at this place and I feel my soul withering. I know you tried and I am not ungrateful, but you did not order a wife, John. You ordered a fantasy. I am not her. I could never be her. I am sorry." There was no signature. It was just a note, an apology, an end to everything. When John came back, he didn't look angry. He looked like a man who'd just been told he was dying. He read the letter, sitting in the empty cabin, and just sat there, staring at the wall. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just froze. He was a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. "She didn't even have the decency to say goodbye to my face," he whispered, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it. "Just a letter on the table like I was a bad business transaction." I didn't know what to say. I just sat there with him as the sun went down, the silence between us filled with the ghosts of what could have been. He had ordered a delicate frontier bride, a woman to bring a little class, a little softness to his hard, lonely life. And she had left him because he couldn't give her the life she needed either. He was a failure. She was a failure. The entire venture was a monument to failure, and all I could do was watch. "She won't make it to Santa Fe," I said finally. "Not alone, not dressed like that. The Apache have been restless near the canyon pass." He didn't even look up. "She's made her choice, Bill." I stood up, a wave of frustration washing over me. "Don't be a fool, John. She's not a horse you can turn loose and forget about. She's a woman, and you're a man. Now what are you going to do about it?" He didn't answer. He just sat there staring at the wall while the world outside grew dark. John's future, whatever it was, had just walked out his door, and he was too beaten to follow. I found John in the barn the next morning, saddling his horse. He wasn't the same man. The weariness was gone, replaced by a grim, cold fury. He moved with a sharp, efficient anger, his hands yanking on the leather straps. He was in his worn, dust-colored work clothes, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't look at me when I walked in. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Santa Fe," he grunted. "It's a 3-day ride for a man who knows what he's doing. It's a 5-day death march for a woman who doesn't." I didn't try to talk him out of it. I just said, "You need supplies, water, food, a decent gun." He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the old John in his eyes. "I know what I need," he said. "I'm going to get my wife back." The day he left was uneventful. The sun was climbing, casting long shadows, and the air was already hot and dry. He packed the horse with a grim, methodical focus. I watched him from the fence. I knew I should be doing something, but I didn't know what. This was between them. This was about a man who had been humiliated and a woman who had been desperate. He was gone for a day. I tried to carry on with my own work, but my mind was on the trail to Santa Fe. I thought of the canyon pass, a narrow, treacherous cut through the mountains where Apache had been known to ambush travelers. I thought of the heat, the lack of water, and the fragile woman who had been sent to make a home and had instead fled. On the second day, a dust storm rolled in from the south. It was a vicious, blinding thing that reduced visibility to a few feet and turned the air into a grinding, suffocating cloud. It lasted for hours. I sheltered in my cabin, listening to the wind howl and the dry earth pelt the walls. I thought of John, out there somewhere in that maelstrom. I thought of her, even more vulnerable. The storm passed, leaving the world washed in a hazy sepia light. I was on my porch, clearing the dust from my face, when I saw two shapes appear on the horizon, moving slowly. It was dusk, the time when the world softens and shadows become long and forgiving. I squinted, trying to make them out. One was a horse. The other was a figure walking. It was John and the woman. They were a strange, sad procession. John was leading his horse, and on the horse, slumped in the saddle, her head hanging low, was Miss Abigail Pemberton. She looked like a ghost, her pale skin ashen, her fine dress now little more than a tattered shroud. She was limp, barely conscious. John's face was a mask of dust and exhaustion. He led the horse to his cabin, not with anger, but with the same grim determination I'd seen on the day he left. He didn't say a word to me as he passed. He just nodded, a single, curt gesture. They were a sight to behold. He was still in his work clothes, torn and filthy, his eyes hollow. She was wrapped in a blanket that looked as dusty as the ground they'd walked on. I could tell by the way she was sagging in the saddle, and by the way he kept his hand on her leg, a steadying touch, that she had been in a bad way. I walked over as he lifted her down from the horse, carrying her into the cabin as if she were made of glass. He laid her on the bed, the one he'd built for them, the one she'd refused to sleep in. He moved with a tenderness I hadn't seen in him before. He brought her water, forced a few drops between her cracked lips, and sat by her side, watching her breathe. I hovered in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. "What happened, John?" I finally asked. He didn't look up from her face. "I found her at the mouth of the canyon. She'd run out of water a day before. Her horse had thrown a shoe. She was just sitting there. All the fight had gone out of her. He paused. I don't know if she would have made it another day. The Apache aren't the only thing in those hills. There are mountain lions, rattlers, 100 ways to die. She wasn't happy to see you, I observed, my voice low. He let out a bitter, quiet laugh. She called me a fool, said I should have let her die. She cried, Bill, a lot. But she was too weak to stand, too weak to fight me, so she let me take her home. And now, I asked. He finally looked at me, and in the dim light of the cabin I saw something I didn't expect. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defeat. It was a profound, bone-deep sense of responsibility. He wasn't just a man who had retrieved a valuable possession. He was a man who had found a dying person and saved her life. That changes a man. Now she stays here, he said, his voice quiet but firm. We figure it out. The next few days were a study in quiet perseverance. She was too weak to do anything at first. I saw John carry her to a chair on the porch so she could get some sun. He built a small fire pit and boiled water. He made a thin broth, the only thing she could keep down. He was patient and gentle in a way I'd never seen him be. He was learning her. I went over one afternoon bringing a fresh-killed rabbit. I found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the vast, empty landscape. She looked pale, but her eyes were clear. She looked at me and offered a ghost of a smile. Hello, Mr. Dawson. How are you feeling, ma'am? I asked. Like a fool, she said, her voice a whisper. A very tired, very foolish, ungrateful fool. She paused, her gaze drifting to the hills. I spent my whole life thinking the world owed me something. I thought if I could just find the right place, the right man, the right dress, I'd be happy. She shook her head, a fragile gesture. I had to almost die in a canyon to realize I was looking for the wrong things. He came for me. He saved my life. He's a good man, John, I said. I know, she said, her eyes glistening. And I didn't see it. I was too busy mourning the roses that wouldn't grow to notice the man who was trying to plant them. She was quiet for a moment, then her gaze found the cabin door where John was inside, working. A new understanding seemed to dawn on her face. He gave me a home. A future. I just couldn't see it. I was too busy looking for a different world that I was missing the one right in front of me. That was the moment, the beginning of a new chapter. She wasn't the delicate bride he'd ordered. She was something else entirely. A woman who had been broken and was now, piece by piece, being put back together by a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. And he, in his own stubborn, silent way, had realized that he didn't want a delicate flower. He wanted a woman who had the strength to survive, even if she had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the life he could offer. A month after her return, the change was nothing short of miraculous. It wasn't the kind of change that happened overnight. It happened in small, quiet moments. It happened when I saw her, not sitting on the porch reading a book, but helping John mend a fence. She was wearing a simple cotton dress, old boots, and a floppy straw hat, and she was holding the wire for him while he hammered. It happened when I heard laughter coming from their cabin. Not just a polite titter, but a full, genuine, belly-deep roar of mirth that echoed across the valley. I couldn't imagine what he could have said that was that funny, but it was the sound of two people finally learning to play together. She started a garden, not the pathetic, doomed flower bed, but a real, practical garden. She had John dig up a patch of ground near the creek where the soil was richer. She planted vegetables, beans, and corn, the things that would keep them alive. It was a different kind of beauty, a practical, useful beauty. She tended to it with a fierce concentration. She said, if I can make a garden grow here, I can grow anything. One morning, I found her on her hands and knees, not in the garden but in the yard, fighting a patch of stubborn, thorny brush. She was hacking at it with a hand axe, her face flushed with effort and a thin sheen of sweat. Her hat had fallen off, and her hair was coming undone. Her muscles bulged as she wrestled with the thorny branches. I watched her for a full minute before she sensed me. Mr. Dawson, she said, panting, don't just stand there, give me a hand. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I almost laughed. The delicate frontier bride was gone. In her place was a strong-armed, clear-eyed, determined woman. She was fighting the land, and she was winning. She had gained the weight back, and her pale skin had taken on a healthy, sun-kissed glow. John came out of the barn, saw us, and grinned. "Bill, good to see you." He walked over and without a word took the axe from her. "Here, let me get that. You're supposed to be resting." "Resting?" she scoffed, wiping her brow. "I've been resting for a month. I'm going stir-crazy. That brush has been an eyesore since I got here." I stayed for supper that evening. It was a different world. The cabin, once a place of despair, was now a home. Her books were neatly stacked on a shelf. A colorful, hand-woven rug lay on the floor. Wildflowers, which she had gone out and picked herself, sat in a jar on the table. She served a delicious stew with fresh bread, and we ate by candlelight. They talked to each other. Not just polite talk, but real, engaged conversation. She told him about a book she'd read, and he told her about the calving season. He told her about a horse he was trying to break, and she asked if she could help. There was a rhythm to their conversation, a give and take. They listened to each other. The silence was no longer a burden. It was a comfortable, easy silence that they shared. "You know, Bill," John said, leaning back in his chair, a contented look on his face, "I think we're going to be just fine." She smiled. It was a real smile full of warmth. "We have our battles," she said, glancing at him, "but we fight them together now." She looked at him, and I saw it in her eyes, a quiet, profound appreciation. And he looked at her with an adoration that was no longer desperate but rooted in respect. He had ordered a delicate bride, but he had gotten a partner. A strong, unyielding, stubborn, magnificent woman who had won his heart not with grace or poise, but with sheer grit. After supper, she pulled out a bundle of fabric. She spread it on the table. It was a deep, rich blue, the color of the desert sky at dusk. She was making a dress, a beautiful, practical dress that she could wear in this new life. She was creating a version of herself that could live here. I left them that night, walking back to my cabin under a canopy of stars. The air was cool and clean. I looked back at their cabin, a single, warm light glowing in the window against the vast, dark wilderness. The world is a strange place. You set out looking for one thing, one dream, one idea of happiness. You think you know what you need, but the universe has a way of laughing at your plans. It hands you something entirely different, something you didn't even know you were missing. John had ordered a delicate frontier bride. He had sent for a flower, a symbol of everything he thought he lacked. What he got, what he needed, was a cactus. A tough, resilient, beautiful woman who could survive the drought and bloom in the desert. As I walked home, the wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the faint, warm sound of their laughter. He had ordered a fantasy, but he had found a new frontier. It was a frontier that existed not on a map, but in the heart. And I had a feeling they were just beginning to explore it.